Hey there. So in this video, we're going to go over the requirements of natural selection notes and the types of selection notes. So packet page 119 and 120. So we're going to start with the requirements of natural selection. So please make sure you are on the correct set of notes in your notebook. They'll be glued in. So the first type of requirement for natural selection we need is variation. So remember from our roundhouse diagram, right, we said that organisms within the same species have variation. Now this variation is caused because of mutations and sexual reproduction. So these two events together, they kind of ensure that not all of the species is exactly the same. If every member of the species was exactly the same, right, there wouldn't be anything for nature to really select for or against. So, for example, if all of the butterflies had the exact same pattern and they were all easily preyed upon, then that species would go extinct or become endangered very quickly. Or maybe they worked too well, and so then they became they overpopulated the area, ate all the food, and then there was a food shortage, and then they started dying out. So either way, we need to make sure that there is variation within the species in order to ensure that there is a selection that can occur. So either for or against the individuals. So variation is caused by mutations, right? Random DNA mutations, and it's also caused from sexual reproduction, crossing over an independent assortment of our chromosomes. The second requirement for natural selection is overproduction of offspring. Again, remember Darwin said in his theory of evolution that living things have more offspring than can survive, therefore they compete for resources. So living things usually produce more offspring than can survive and reproduce. So if we take a look at our example here of these baby turtles, the mama turtle, when she came up onto land and laid her eggs, she probably laid 200 eggs. That's an absurdly high number of offspring to have. Imagine having 200 brothers and sisters. But because of the environment that they live or that they're hatched in, not all of these baby turtles will be able to make it to the shoreline. So not all of them will survive. Some of them will probably get picked off by predators. Some of them will probably get distracted by the city lights that are behind them, and they'll accidentally head towards town, which means they'll probably get run over or just honestly starve to death before they can figure out their mistake. So we try to overproduce offspring because we know not all of them are going to survive. Because if we underproduce and we lose offspring, that's how we go extinct. So living things produce more offspring than can survive. Because we have a lot of organisms that do survive, they do have the good, nature does select for them, resources, right, become limited. So you have competition for limited resources like food, water, shelter, even mates. If I'm a bird, I'm trying to find a mate, right? Those are not unlimited things. So because a lot of organisms do survive, we create competition for these resources. And that competition is what drives natural selection because again, nature, right, the environment is going to choose which trait is best suited for that environment. So here we've got two individuals, they're competing over limited resources, meaning food, right? And one organism, right, is tall enough to reach the food. The other one, she is not tall enough, so she might not survive because she does not get enough food. She does not have enough energy to go and find a mate and reproduce. The last type of requirement for natural selection, right, differential reproductive success. So some organisms have traits, for example, camouflage, that can help them to survive more easily. And because they survived, they are able to go on and reproduce. This means that they will have more offspring, right, in the next generation. So the next generation will contain more of their successful traits, right, the camouflage, and the organisms that were not successful, there will be fewer of their traits in the next generation. So here's that example again of our beetles, right? The green beetles, right, they really stand out in the background, whereas the brown beetles, again, they are blending in, they're camouflaged just a little bit better. So if there was a second panel down here, we would probably see the number of brown beetles increase from 3, to maybe 6 or 7, because they survived, they will be able to pass on their traits to the next generation. So the next generation will have more, right, of the brown beetles, and we will start to see fewer and fewer of the green beetles because they're getting picked off by that predator because they're not blending in as easily. So those are our 4 requirements kind of for natural selection. But if I really wanted to my notebook, I could say variation, right, plus competition for limited resources, plus overproduction of offspring, right, equals differential reproductive success. So overproducing offspring, variation, and competition leads one generation to be more successful, and then those successful genes are passed on to the next generation. So now that we kind of have a better understanding of natural selection and how that works, let's take a look at the types of natural selection. So these are our notes, packet page 120. So we've already cut these out and glued them in to our notebook. So there are 3 ways that natural selection can cause populations to change. There's stabilizing natural selection, disruptive natural selection, and directional natural selection. So let's take a look at stabilizing natural selection. So on your paper, on the left-hand side, it says graph, right? We need to create a graph of the before and after stabilizing selection. So what we're going to do is, with our pencil, we're just going to draw a straight, line, all right, right here, like this. And then after is going to be a dotted line. So now I'm going to put a little dotted line. And my dotted line is basically just going to be thinner, right? It's thinner and it is taller than my before line. So this is what we're going to graph in our notebook. So when we're talking about which trait, right, is favored during stabilizing selection, we're looking at the average trait, right? So if I were to number this off, maybe from 0 to 10, the average is the trait that is being selected for. So we call that stabilizing selection because it's the average. So an example of stabilizing natural selection is in human birth weight. So again, sticking with those numbers, 0 over here on the left, 10 pounds over here on the right. Right, I want a baby, a human baby wants to be born at around 5 or 6 pounds. That is the optimal or the best birth weight for that baby to survive. If the birth weight is too low, right, they might be premature, or that might mean that they have underlying health issues. If the baby is too big, maybe it might not fit out of the birth canal, or again, that could point to some type of disorder that the baby is born with because it has a high or a low birth weight. So we aim for a average birth weight for stabilizing selection. So make sure you've got your straight line for the before and then a dotted line for the after. And by before and after, we mean, over the course of 100 years or something, we are, recording and measuring and taking a look at the data of human birth weight. And what we see is that most babies are born here at an average weight of about 5 to 6 pounds. The next type of natural selection is disruptive natural selection. So I'm going to use the same before line that I did in the stabilizing, right? So here's my before line. My after line, the dotted line, though, is basically going to have two humps. I'm going to come up, and then I'm going to shoot down, right? And then I'm going to go back up. So basically my after line kind of looks like an uppercase M. So before is solid, the after is the dotted. So in disruptive natural selection, the trait that's being favored is not the average trait, but it is the two extremes that are being favored. So the number of individuals with the average trait actually decreases, right? Because here's my average here in the middle. If I had drawn a graph here, which I probably should have, I'm sorry. I'll be sure to add that later. But again, if this is 0 and this is 10, right, the number of individuals afterwards that have the average trait is none. I'm favoring the two extremes. So, for example, there is a mouse, it's called a rock pocket mouse, that has variation. They have a light and a dark fur color. And both of those traits are favorable because they live on a light, sandy desert environment, but they also live in a dark rock environment. So their environment basically goes light sand for a few miles and then suddenly becomes dark rock. And then it goes back to light sand and then dark rock. So having both of the extremes, light fur and dark fur, are both selected for. But a medium mouse, right, that would be maybe a gray color, would be selected against because the gray would not be camouflaged with the light sand nor the dark rock. So no matter where that medium gray mouse color was found, it would be preyed upon. But the light and the dark colored mice blend in with at least half of their environment, so they survive at a higher rate, meaning the environment is selecting for the light and dark colors and selecting against that medium gray color. So disruptive selection, the trait that's being favored is both extremes. Our third type of natural selection is called directional selection. So again, for my graph, I'm going to draw the same before line, right here. This is my before line. And then my dotted line is my after. And so here's my after. So this is basically after directional selection has taken place. So in this type of natural selection, the trait that's being favored is one of the extremes. So in this graph, right, I'm favoring, right, this extreme over here. So for example, right, giraffe neck length. Giraffes with long necks are favored. The medium ones die off, but even the more short-necked giraffes die off. So directional selection is going to favor just one extreme. So let's just stick with my same numbering system, right? Maybe 0 inches to 10 inches. So a giraffe with the longer neck is going to survive. Medium necks, I mean, they're doing a little bit better than the short neck giraffes, but overall, the only trait that's really being successful is the longest necked giraffes. So we have directional selection. Basically, we are moving to just one of the extremes being favored. Okay, so that is it for our notes on the requirements for natural selection and the types of natural selection notes. If you have any questions or concerns, please be sure to let me know. I'll see you next time.